Katie of Timber Falls, a frontier love story. Dedication, for the women who were told no by the world and answered with a life that said yes. Sold like a mule. Timber Falls. Wore the late summer light like a bruise, yellow and fading. Dust rose from wagon wheels and settled on the clapboard store. The livery, the nailed up. Flyers bleeding ink in the heat. In the square, a temporary platform had been hammered together from rough planks. Katie Brennan stood on it, hands tied loosely by a length of hemp that scratched her wrists. Barren as a salt flat, her father called to the crowd, voice bright as a new coin. Can't give a husband an heir, but strong and obedient, works hard. Who'll take her? A buzzing passed through the onlookers. Men in brims, women in bonnets. A boy licking a peppermint stick, eyes round as buttons, not understanding what any of this meant. Katie lifted her chin. If there was one thing her grandmother had taught her, it was how to hold your head steady so the shame slid off like rain. $2 to start, said a man with a red neckerchief. Laughter snapped around him. Her father, Seamus Brennan, grinned like a man at cards with a hidden ace. 2. She's worth more than an oxen team to a man with a farm. Another voice cut through the noise. I'll take her. The speaker stepped from the shadows, cast by the mercantile awning. Jake Sullivan was tall, blue-eyed and burned, his hair the color of pine bark. He was known in Timber Falls for his hands, how they could fell a tree clean and true, and how they trembled when he tried to braid his youngest daughter's hair. He had been a husband once. He was still a father 4 times over. She's not property, he said, calm and clear. She's a person. If she comes with me, it's by her say. So, and she'll have a wage and a place at my table. The murmurs shifted. That widower, someone whispered. The one with the little ones who run wild. Seamus spat. A sermon, is it? This is family business. Katie swallowed. The rope burned. She looked at the faces, most curious, some pitying, a few hungry. She found Jake's gaze and held it. There was kindness there. But something else too, a quiet, everyday courage. What's your name? He asked her, as if they were introduced at a church picnic. Katie, she said. Miss Brennan, he corrected himself, tipping his hat. I'm Jake Sullivan. I have 4 children who need caring for. I can offer a wage, a roof, respect. The sheriff, Keller, with his tidy mustache and tidy books, shifted by the well, expression unreadable. Katie turned away from the crowd to the place the sky met the firs. Choice was sometimes a road with only one direction. I'll go, she said. Seamus slapped a paper into her hands. The bill of sale. The rope came off, and the platform tilted beneath her feet as she stepped down. Jake didn't touch her. He only walked nearby as she crossed the square, past the women who hid their mouths behind gloved fingers, past Reverend Blackwood frowning like a thundercloud. At the edge of town, where the road gave way to forest, Katie spoke first. You don't know me. I know you're not property, he said, and kept his eyes on the path. She wet her lips. If your children don't like me, they'll learn, he said, weary and hopeful in the same breath. Or I will. They walked until the town fell behind them, and the trees gathered around like old friends. And somewhere beneath the canopy, between the light and the shade, a girl who had been sold made a small private vow. I am not for sale again. The Sullivan cabin sat on a rise where the pines opened to meadow. Flowers made of fireweed and sun painted the grass. Smoke curled from the stovepipe and drifted toward the river's far-off hush. 4 faces peered from the doorway like a painting come to life. Children, Jake said, with a steadiness he didn't feel. This is Miss Brennan. She'll be helping here. She's short, said Ben, the smallest, configured entirely of knees and curiosity. Brave, said Thomas, who was 12 and practiced at watching for storms. Nora, 10, said nothing, only crossed her arms like a gate. Emma, 7, stepped forward and tugged a piece of fawn, colored hair behind her ear. I'm Emma, she declared, as if the sun rose because she said so. Katie let her smile be gentle and careful. Hello, inside, the house had a grief smell. Something like cold ashes and unwashed cups. The table bore the scars of knives and elbows. The stove door sagged on its hinge. In the corner, a tiny pair of shoes belonged to nobody living. Jake cleared his throat, embarrassed by the mess and the life. We get by, he said. I see that, Katie answered. It wasn't unkind. He took his hat off and turned it in his hands. I can fell a tree and yoke an ox and build a roof that will keep off snow. I can read the river by the sound it makes under ice. But I burn biscuits and put the washing where the rain will ruin it. And I don't know what to do when Emma wakes crying for her ma in a voice that splits me. He had not meant to say that. Words could bolt from a man if he left the gate unlatched. Katie looked at the little shoes, the crooked stove door, the fear in Nora's set jaw. Let me try, she said softly, rolling up her sleeves. She found the flour tin and inspected it with an appraising eye, tapped the yeast from a jar, like a magician conjuring a dove. She set the kettle to singing. She opened windows and moved blankets outside, one by one, to beat out the dust. The house stirred like a patient waking, suspicious of the light. By evening, there was stew with carrots and onion, the savory sweetness of thyme. Ben licked his spoon like a cat. Emma fell asleep with her cheek on the table, safe in the circle of lamplight. Thomas asked quiet questions about how long dough should rise. Nora pretended not to watch, and watched anyway. Later, when the children had been settled, Ben with sleepy protests, Emma with a soft lullaby Katie, remembered from a childhood that felt like a photograph. Jake stood on the porch, hat in hand. The night had stepped close, dense with pine and star. You worked a miracle, he said. Only supper, she said. I can pay weekly, he added. I meant that. You can go if you wish, anytime. I know, she said, and surprised herself by meaning it. But for now, I'd like to stay. Across the yard, a whip pour, Will called once and then again. Jake nodded and stared at the sky as if there were instructions written in it. Thank you, he said to the stars, or to her, or to both. Inside, on a shelf of seldom touched things, a folded paper waited like a snake under a rock, biding its time. Timber Falls had 3 churches and 7 places to gossip: the mercantile, the livery, the pump, the steps of the courthouse, the schoolyard, the post office, and Mrs. Goodwin's considerable porch. That girl lives out there with him, Mrs. Goodwin told a cluster of bonnets. Her eyes shimmered with the joy of a new fact. Not married, said another, fanning herself with a church bulletin. Children in the house, impressionable and tender. Jake's a decent man, said a third, less convinced than she sounded. Reverend Blackwood thundered the following Sunday about the appearance of sin, which could be as damning as sin itself if folks weren't careful. Sheriff Keller leaned against a post outside the saloon afterward, still and watchful. Doc Henley, white-haired, gentle as a wind through wheat, stopped Jake by the pump. How is Emma's cough? Better, Jake said. Miss Brennan, Katie, has a way with the kettle and the herbs. Doc's eyes warmed. I've met her grandmother, he said almost to himself. In another town, many years ago. She had hands that knew the old ways. There's wisdom on that branch of the tree. People are talking, Jake said, voice low. They always are, Doc Henley answered. Do right anyway. At the cabin, Katie kept doing right. She taught Thomas the trick of testing bread with the pad of your finger instead of your eyes. She combed burrs from Nora's hair, not mentioning the tears that always came with the knots. She let Ben help with the eggs and applauded every unbroken shell. She sang Emma to sleep, and when no one watched, hummed to the house itself, letting the tune find the beams in the stove and the worn floorboards, as if music could shore up what nails could not. One afternoon, Seamus Brennan arrived in a cloud of dust with a lawyer beside him, and Sheriff Keller riding bareheaded. eyes narrowed. The horse snorted at the scent of trouble. "She's my daughter," Seamus announced without greeting. "What happened in the square was a mistake of heat and temper. The paper was not legal. I'll take her back." Jake didn't step off the porch. "Katie chooses for herself," he said. "That is the beginning and end of the matter." "Not under the law," the lawyer said, smoothing his mustache with an ink-stained finger. "Women cannot contract for themselves without a guardian." "I'm not a barrel of molasses," Katie said, more tired than angry. "And I'm not going with you." Keller's gaze traveled slowly from the rope coiled by the well to the axe, leaning against the chopping block to the small face of Emma pressed against the window. "There's talk," he said. "And where there's smoke, there's somebody blowing hard," Katie snapped before she could stop herself. Jake's hand tightened on the porch railing. "You've had your say," he told the men. "Now, take your dust and go." They did, but the dust didn't settle. It drifted over the ridge into town and mixed with Mrs. Goodwin's tea sugar and Reverend Blackwood's sermons and the sheriff's ink until the air itself seemed to taste of it. And still, morning came and bread was made and children grew. Love, when it comes, sometimes wears an apron and a bandana and shows up in 100 small obediences. Autumn took the color out of the leaves and the warmth out of the light. The river spoke in a colder voice. Jake stacked wood until the pile looked like a mountain that had fallen over. Katie stocked the pantry with jars that caught the sun like lanterns. Plums and peaches, beans and beets. Summer kept alive under glass. "Do you miss town?" Nora asked one day, picking at a splinter on the table's edge. "Sometimes I miss the market," Katie said. "Sometimes I don't miss anything at all." "Do you miss your ma and da?" Emma asked, small face upturned like a flower seeking light. Katie opened her mouth and then closed it. "My grandmother was my home," she said, and let that be the truth for the moment. The first snow came like a curtain falling across a stage. Quiet and complete. On the second night, the wind pushed at the windows, testing them for weakness. On the third morning, Emma woke with cheeks hot as baked apples, breath catching like a thread on a nail. "Katie," Jake's voice broke. He couldn't make his mouth say the word sick, as if the syllable would pull the floor out from under him. Katie's palm found Emma's forehead and read it. "Fever," she said, and the cough listened deep. "We won't get Doc through that road. We'll start now." She lit the stove and put the kettle on. Set a pot to simmer with sliced onion, thyme, a bark of willow, water, and patience. She plunged cloths into a basin of warm water and wrung them out until her hands were pink and singing. She boiled pine needles to strong tea and sweetened it with honey until Emma could tolerate the bitterness. She made a little tent of blankets over a bowl of steaming water and held Emma while the vapors climbed into her chest. All night the house was a ship in a storm, groaning, tossing, refusing to go under. Ben slept beside the hearth like a cat, one hand still curled around a toy horse. Thomas carried buckets and didn't cry until morning, when he thought no one could see. Nora sat without moving, her eyes two lit coals, offering her steadiness like a prayer. When the fever spiked, Emma muttered syllables that were pieces of her dreams. Mama, river. Jake pressed a cloth to her head and watched it steam with the heat. "Please," he said to the god he talked to mostly in the trees. "Please, hand me the mustard," Katie said, and he moved before the word died. She made a poultice and laid it on the little chest and hummed while the medicine talked to the lungs. At dawn, the kettle sighed. The wind calmed like a drunk man settling to sleep. Emma's breath, once a saw blade through her ribs, slid into a softer rhythm. The fever opened its fist and let her go. Jake leaned his head against the doorframe, dizzy with relief. He found Katie by the bed, hair undone, lips cracked with the night. "You saved her. She saved me," Katie whispered, and then she slept sitting up, her hands still around Emma's small one, as if they were connected by more than fingers. When the road cleared, Doc Henley appeared on snowshoes, wool cap pulled low. He listened to Emma's chest, felt her pulse, nodded. "New lungs by spring," he said, and patted Emma's cheek. He turned to Katie. "You've a good memory for old knowledge. My grandmother taught me. And someone taught your grandmother," he said. "We are never just ourselves." He stamped snow from his boots and warmed his hands. "By the way, Sheriff Keller rode out this morning with Seamus Brennan and that clever little lawyer. Town's stirring a hornet's nest." Katie's gaze drifted to the shelf of Seldom, touched things. "Let them stir," she murmured. "We are not hornets. We are a house." Later, while putting clean linens in the big cedar chest, she felt her fingers catch on a seam that wasn't a seam. She pulled. Wood yielded. A space opened. Inside, folded 3 times, lay a certificate with Dr. Wallace Webb's seal. Her eyes traced the words, "Miss Catherine Brennan, examination, normal. No sign of infertility." Scrawled below, per instructions, SB. She sat down hard on the chest, as if the floor had fallen a foot. The room tilted, righted, tilted again. A laugh surprised her. It sounded like a glass breaking. "Not barren. Never barren." The word had been a hand pressed over her mouth, and now the hand was gone. She folded the paper again, carefully, as if it were made of breath. When Jake came in with an armful of wood, she held it out. "Look." He read it. He read it again, slower. He made a sound like a man setting down a load he'd been carrying so long, he'd forgotten it was there. When he looked up, his eyes were wet and furious. "He did this to you," he said of Seamus, and Webb signed. Katie put the paper on the table and smoothed it with her palm. "They sold me easier with a lie." She had been misnamed. Now, she named herself again. A woman with a future that didn't end at a word someone else pinned to her, like a tag on a bolt of cloth. The knowledge slid into her, like a key into the right lock. Word is a river. In Timber Falls, it ran fastest when it carried scandal. By noon, everyone who needed to know had heard that Miss Katie Brennan wasn't barren, that doctor. Webb had written, as he was told, that Seamus Brennan had paid for the lie. The river ran right to Sheriff Keller's office and pooled under his door. At dusk, wagon wheels crunched in the hard snow and stopped at the Sullivan yard. Seamus climbed down in his good coat, face stiff as tallow. Dr. Webb stepped carefully to avoid mud on his boots. Sheriff Keller followed, a shadow with a badge. They didn't knock. They filled the doorway with their certainty. "She comes with me," Seamus announced. "She is my daughter. She belongs to her family." Katie stood behind the table. She had braided her hair like armor. "I belong to myself," she said, voice clean and ringing. Keller's lip twitched. The paper from the square was no contract. There was money exchanged, but no law recognizes. "Enough," Jake said, not loud but final. "You will not speak of her as if she were a crate of apples." Behind him, Thomas shifted the axe from one hand to the other. Nora stood beside Emma's bed, wide-eyed but unafraid. Ben sucked his thumb and glared as if his small fury could add to the room's heat. Bootsteps crunched outside. More men. Jake set his jaw and took a step forward. Doc Henley appeared first, palming his spectacles as if they were a weapon. With him came Tom Bradley, the territorial prosecutor, a man who had learned to keep his hat on in rooms where others struggled to keep their heads. Behind them, the town. Not all of it. Enough. Mrs. Goodwin, cheeks flushed with embarrassment at being wrong. 3 farmers whose wives had sent them with stew last winter when Mary died. The blacksmith's wife, who had birthed 6 and buried 2 and knew about love and force and the difference between them. Even Reverend Blackwood, pale and stern, his mouth a thin line, that might yet become a bridge. Bradley didn't waste words. "I've been in receipt of complaints," he said to Keller, voice like a well-placed wedge. "Common threads. Dr. Webb, your office. Girls declared infertile or unfit or mad or some other tidy word. Then moved on like cattle. You call it guardianship. I call it fraud, and worse." Keller's face performed a trick it had practiced, innocent confusion. Baseless. Doc Henley lifted the certificate Katie had found. "My seal would never be on a lie," he said, each word white. Hot. Bradley nodded toward Katie. "Miss Brennan, would you speak?" She did. Not to make a performance of suffering, but to place a brick where a wall should be. She told them about the day in the doctor's office. The smell of carbolic and peppermint, the way Dr. Webb had not met her eye. She told them of her father's voice saying, "It's for the best." She told them how a town square can turn into a market if people let it. She was precise. She was not ashamed. When she finished, there was a quiet like the moment before lightning. "Sheriff Keller," Bradley said, "you will hand me your badge. Dr. Webb, you will accompany me to the courthouse. We will sort this in full daylight." Keller laughed, two short barks with no mirth in them, then saw that the men behind Bradley were not there to laugh. Seamus took a step as if to claim Katie by the arm. Jake moved, and Seamus stopped. "Daughter?" he tried, the word rusty. Katie lifted the certificate. "This told the story you wanted," she said. "This tells the truth. I am not your mule to be sold or reclaimed." Reverend Blackwood cleared his throat, words seeming to surprise even him as they came. "A sin confessed belongs to God," he announced to the air. "But a sin concealed belongs to the devil and his works." He looked at Katie. "You will not be punished for another's transgression in this town." One by one, the people of Timber Falls said the same thing without saying it. A nod from the blacksmith, a hand on Jake's shoulder from the farmer, who had shared his last sack of flour that spring after Mary died. Mrs. Goodwin, whispering, "I was wrong. I am sorry. I brought biscuits." Keller's badge came off like a scab. Webb's hands found the air, empty of the instruments he used for harm and healing alike. Bradley turned to go, and the town went with him, their bodies making the law larger than any piece of paper. When the yard was quiet, Jake set the axe back against the chopping block. He looked at Katie as if he'd walked a long way to arrive at a place he recognized. "You're shaking," he said. "A little," she admitted. He reached for her hand, then stopped, and she reached the rest of the way. Their fingers met like things designed to fit. Snow melted in seams, then in patches, then in floods. The river roared like a congregation. Shoots of green argued their case in the soil, and won. Emma ran again. Lungs making music, where once there had been a saw. Timber Falls changed in ways you mostly notice by absence. The absence of fear when a girl went to the doctor alone. The absence of secrecy, like a fog at the courthouse door. Tom Bradley wrote letters to the Capitol that bore fruit. Doc Henley took on an apprentice, a young woman with sharp eyes who knew the names of plants before she knew the names of jurors. Reverend Blackwood preached repentance to men who needed to hear it, and tenderness to those who had earned it. Seamus Brennan moved to a cousin's farm and learned what silence can do to a man who has lost the right to speak into another's life. In the Sullivan cabin, the days fell into a pattern, both new and old. Katie sewed curtains, the color of river stones, and planted a kitchen garden close to the door, so she could step out in bare feet and pick thyme with the kettle already singing. Thomas grew 2 inches, and the start of a smile. Nora unfolded like a secret revealed, her first laugh a bright bell, like thing that made Jake drop a bowl and grin like a fool. Ben lost a tooth and announced it to everyone, including the chickens. When the last frost was only a rumor, Jake found Katie at the fence, watching the sky as if reading a letter written by light. "I've been thinking," he said. And Ned the mule put his earnest face between them as if to give counsel. About a house." he said, and a woman who makes it, and a family that becomes itself in her hands. About how you came to us a mercy and became a miracle I can touch. She kept her eyes on the horizon, because it made courage easier. Miracles are God's business, she said. Maybe, he said. But I think he asks us to carry them sometimes, so they don't break. He shifted, nervous as a boy. Katie, Miss Brennan, would you allow me? Would you agree? If I asked, she turned. Yes, she said, and then laughed, because he hadn't managed to finish the sentence. Yes, he echoed, incredulous and delighted. Yes, Jake Sullivan, she said properly, standing very straight because her grandmother would have wanted her to. I will be your wife, not because I need a name to stand behind, but because I have learned the shape of this life and it fits my hands. He laughed then, a sound like a log cracking in a good fire. He took off his hat and kissed her as a man kisses in daylight. Honestly, without spectacle. Somewhere, Ben announced to the chickens that people were being ridiculous, which only made everyone in the yard, including the chickens, immensely happy. They didn't wait long. Weddings are sometimes grand affairs with ribbons and a roast. Sometimes they are a circle of people on new grass with the smell of fresh-cut pine. Doc Henley bringing a Bible, and Reverend Blackwood bringing a prayer, and Mrs. Goodwin bringing her pride in changing her mind. Emma threw petals that looked like pieces of sunrise. Nora adjusted Katie's borrowed veil with the competence of a woman who would someday command a ship or a household with equal grace. Thomas tried not to cry and failed nobly. Ben held both ring and biscuit and lost neither. I do, they said, and the words were as old as anything and as new as two hearts can make them. Summer came with a blue so deep you could drown in it. The Sullivan place, now the Sullivan. Brennan House, though no one said it like a ledger. Bustled. There was a cradle that would not be needed until a time appointed. There were shelves with labels. Katie wrote in her neat hand. There were evenings where Jake played a tune on a battered fiddle, and the children spun until the room was a blur of elbows and joy. Sometimes very late, when the house was asleep and the river whispered its endless story, Katie would take the certificate from its place and look at it, not because she needed proof anymore, but because victory sometimes must be held in the hand to be believed. She put it away and put a new paper beside it. Their marriage license, names carefully spelled, witnessed by a town that had chosen to become better than its worst instincts. When people told the story later, the one about the winter of 1875, they made it tidy because stories like to be tidy. They spoke of Keller and Webb being taken to trial in the county seat. They spoke of Tom Bradley, as if one man had been the change instead of 100 quiet decisions, gathering into one loud one. They spoke of Reverend Blackwood, of Mrs. Goodwin, of the blacksmith's wife, whose name the men always forgot to say. Katie knew the truth as her grandmother had taught her. A village is a weave. Pull one thread and you find it caught to another. Corruption is a weave too, but so is courage. Both ask for hands. Timber Falls had given its hands to courage, and that had become the tale. On a day in late August, Katie and Jake took the children to the river. Emma waited without coughing. Ben caught a frog and announced a list of names, settling on Augustus. Nora lay back in the grass and made friends with the clouds. Thomas skipped a stone that leapt 6 times and landed like a promise. Jake sat beside Katie on the bank and let his shoulder rest against hers. We are all of us stitched, he said. We are, she agreed. He nodded to the far side of the water, where the trees made a dark hem against the sky. There's enough wood there to build a second room. For what? He considered, eyes bright with ideas. For whatever comes, for whoever we become. She laced her fingers through his. Yes, she said, as she had said the first time. The word had not grown old. It had grown larger, able to hold more of their days. When evening settled, they walked home together, the path worn now by their many steps. The house waited, lamplight at the window like a heartbeat. The door opened. The future stepped through and set the table. Timber Falls remembered. It remembered how a town can be a market or a refuge. It remembered how a woman told the truth, and the truth made a road where none had been. It remembered how a man said, "She is a person," and meant it in every nail he hammered and every bowl he washed. It remembered how a family can be built, not from the easy timber of luck, but from the harder wood of daily kindness. And in that remembering, the town became the place it had always wanted to be. One where no girl is sold, where no lie stands unchallenged, where love is not a performance, but a practice, finis.